if I were anything other than a comedy writer or a psychiatrist, I would be a blank.
Poor man.
Okay. So going backwards in time, how did you first get into comedy writing? When did it start? What was the path? When I was going to college, becoming a comedy writer, I'm not that funny, but even becoming a comedy writer wasn't even a dream I could have had. But how did it happen for you?
Well, I think for me, I think comedy was a bit of a defense mechanism, a way to cope with a lot of craziness that I saw around me growing up. And when I got to college, I met some really sharp, funny people,
Mhm.
and thought, boy, I want to spend more time with these people. I love horsing around with them. So they called it comping, where you submit some pieces to get on the college humor magazine, and you go through this kind of audition process. And that worked out. So I got to spend more time with these crazy, funny people. And I took the pre-med classes, but I had this kind of schizoid life where I was like, some of these people seem to be getting jobs writing for funny TV shows.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to try that. So after college, before applying to medical school, like, I'll give this a year or two and submit some sketches to Saturday Night Live and this show called In Living Color.
Hmm.
And it worked out. And then, so I worked on Saturday Night Live for 1 year. And when Jerry hosted the show, I was able to pass along a script to him, Larry David, and Larry Charles,
Right.
who Larry Charles was just so supportive and helpful. He read the script. They call it a spec script, where it's like a sample script. He thought it showed some promise. They didn't want to produce that particular script, but he said, there's some interesting stuff here. Send us some more ideas.
Right.
Maybe it'll lead to something.
Hmm.
So I kept faxing ideas to Larry Charles, one of the writers
Hmm.
on the Seinfeld show, and he and Larry David would give me feedback. They like picked a couple and said, these seem good, flesh these out. So I kept building an outline, putting some meat on the bones.
Yeah.
And finally, I got a call like 6 months later, come on in and pitch it, talk to us about it, walk us through it.
Hmm.
So I went to the CBS Radford lot in Studio City,
Yeah. Yeah.
so nervous because I was a huge fan of the show
Sure.
and of Jerry's stand up. I hadn't seen Larry's stand up, but I loved his show. And I've got my little outline in my hand. I'm like 23 years old, and I'm walking them through the outline, and they're laughing. They seem to be enjoying it. And Larry, when I'm done, Larry says, good job. I want you to write this script. And I took that to mean that I didn't really understand the TV business. I
Right.
thought he was rooting for me and that he had to like talk to the network and talk to other producers on the show to see, but he was in my corner. He wanted
Sure.
me to write it. So I went home encouraged, but just kind of figuring I'd have to wait a little while to hear whether I actually got the script.
Hmm.
And a week goes by and my agent calls me and says, why didn't you tell me you got the script? I said, I didn't.
Right.
Larry David's rooting for me. And he said, no, that means you got the script. He runs the show.
Yeah.
So, and then later, like I was saying, you mine your life for ideas. That was an idea when the well's running dry, you're like, oh, well, that was funny that I misinterpreted what Larry said. So that became a George Costanza story where he goes for a job interview and the guy says, I want you to have this job. And just to make it a little clearer, he's interrupted by a phone call. He says, I want you to have this job, of course. And then the phone rings.
Right. Right.
So that made it, even more ambiguous than my situation had been. But
Sure.
it was just this idea of you get the job interview and you don't know what came of it.
Hmm. That's wow, amazing. And let me ask, when you're writing for Saturday Night Live, is that something that happens so writers will slip a script to a guest host, or is that against the rules? There are no rules. How does that work?
There might have been a rule against it. I don't know.
Uh,
I'm not sure. Adam Sandler was helpful. He was, doing a lot of stand up. He knew Jerry and he got the script.
oh, got
He
it.
put his rubber stamp on it. He was on the show with me at that time and was very nice to me and supportive. Um, but yeah, that could have easily gone nowhere. You know what? It happened to be a time, luck is so big in show business.
Yeah.
It was the Seinfeld program was like, except for the start, was like hugely popular from season 3 on, and they were getting inundated with scripts. They had plenty of writers, but that was one little window of time when they were considering bringing in a writer. So
Right.
it was really good timing. And Larry Charles, happened to respond to that script I sent in. Yeah.
Unbelievable. And so after you get the job for that script, how does that turn into continuing to write for the next however many years, the next 5 or 6 years for Seinfeld?
Well, the script that I pitched that I didn't know whether they had bought, and they actually had bought, that was a freelance script that became the Junior Mint episode,
Oh,
and that
wow.
went well, and they brought me on staff the following year.
Uh-huh.
I was just I was putting so much pressure on myself because the Junior Mint was such a hit,
Yeah.
that I felt like I got to follow this up with something great. And I was just kind of a psychological mess, really having writer's block.
Yeah.
I wrote an episode called The Barber that had some funny storylines. I had a couple of other storylines that were good that I ended up using later, but you
Mhm.
gotta, writers, you have to be able to pitch them well. And
Right.
that was something that I wasn't great at, that I got better at. You have to be enthusiastic, and you have to be a little bit of a stand-up, a little bit of an actor to really sell an idea
Hmm.
well. So some of the ideas that I was pitching, I wasn't selling well. It was a really rough year. And I thought it would be a more nurturing and
Yeah.
close, friendly environment. And it was a tough environment
Hmm.
because everybody is trying to come up with funny ideas, and everybody is like, the show had a big spotlight on it,
Hmm.
very high standards. Larry and Jerry really were very particular. Credit to them, it made the show better.
Yeah.
But it was a difficult environment. We would all have lunch together, and that was a little bit of a fun, like 45 minutes. But then
Hmm.
you go back to your room and you're staring at the walls, looking at your empty whiteboard, trying to think of stuff. And so, um, what I ended up doing is I realized that I needed to work with a partner
Hmm.
because being alone in the room was driving me a little nuts. I needed to hear somebody laugh,
Right.
and to collaborate with. And my friend Greg, who I mentioned, he had started a company in Boston, but I said, listen, he was a fan of the Seinfeld show, and he was happy to work on ideas with me. And so the two of us started writing together, and that was much better. We had good synergy. My mood was better, and you need to be in a happy, silly mood to write
Sure.
comedy.
Yeah.
So that worked out. We ended up writing together, I don't know, 7 or 8 scripts together, something like that.